Tired of the ordinary at lunchtime? Why not try something smart to chew on? The Lunchroom on RCI, Monday to Friday, 12:45 to 2 p.m. The Lunchroom, informative, enlightening, provocative, engaging. The Lunchroom on RCI, food for thought. The station that gives you, more lunch.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchroom on Radio Caribbean International for Tuesday, the 9th of September, 2025. And it is program number 1447 of the Lunchroom. I'm your host, Calix George Jr. Now, in addition to radio 101.1 FM, you can also get us at our website. It is rcistlucia.com, and we are streaming live on Facebook. You just have to search for the official page of Radio Caribbean International. Please be sure to like and share that as well with our friends and family. Now, of course, if you want to call into the program, you can do just that. And that number is 452-3046. Again, 452-3046. And you can always message in on our WhatsApp number. That is 724-0008. Again, you can call in on that WhatsApp number as well, especially if you're overseas. That number is 724-0008. Now, today we want to look at some history on this day. And back in the year 1776 on this day, the Congress officially renamed the country, which we now know as the United States of Americas, from the what was formerly known as the United Colonies. In the year 1817, Alexander Twilight, likely the first African-American to graduate from a U.S. college, received a B.A. degree from Middlebury College. In the year 1914, on this day, the first fully mechanized unit in the British Army was created, the Canadian Automobile Machine Gun Brigade, and that was during World War I. 1993, on this day, September the 9th, we saw Israel and Palestine Liberation Organization exchange letters of mutual recognition. And in the 2009, September the 9th, right here in St. Lucia, we saw the occurrence of a fire at the surgical wing of St. Jude Hospital, and ended up losing 3 lives in that unfortunate fire, and of course led to the relocation of St. Jude Hospital. 2015, on this day, Queen Elizabeth II became Great Britain's longest reigning monarch at 63 years and 7 months. And she beat the previous record set by her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. We now move on to our dish of the day.
Our hospitals tells a story of someone's mother, someone's brother, someone's friend. And when that story of care is complete, it's time for the next chapter, home. But too often, discharged patients are left waiting hours, days, weeks, sometimes months, not because they want to stay, but because no one comes. We understand life gets busy, but every extra day they wait means another patient, perhaps in pain, perhaps in crisis, can't get the bed they desperately need. So when the call comes that your loved one is ready, please be ready too. Pick them up, bring them back to the comfort of family, where healing truly continues. Because caring doesn't end at discharge, it continues with you. A message from the Ministry of Health, Wellness and Elderly Affairs.
Serving now, the Daily Dish.
And welcome back to our program here at Lunchroom on Radio Caribbean International. And of course, as I mentioned in the our history for today, the matter of St. Jude Hospital, the anniversary of that fire, which devastated the island's second general hospital and, of course, the secondary care facility for the south of the island for approximately 70,000 people was decimated by fire on the 9th of September 2009. And just a few hours ago, the Prime Minister, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, posted on his Facebook social media profile on September 9th, 2009, the St. Jude Hospital fire marked one of the most tragic chapters in our nation's history. Today, let us remember the lives lost, the families who mourn, and the bravery of our hardworking first responders and staff who performed heroic feats on that day. Today also stands as a moment of renewed hope as we prepare for the transition to a modern St. Jude Hospital at its original site. We will open this hospital to honor those who have gone, to recognize those who have persevered, and to serve our people, particularly those in the South. And that post, as I said, coming from the island's Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, the Honorable Philip J. Pierre. Of course, St. Jude Hospital has unfortunately also become the victim of tremendous political banter and machinations. And, of course, the matter of a hospital has always been a serious one, and the direction to which a facility of that nature goes is important to us all, because at the end of the day, we all have to be born. And in today's dispensation, most people get born in a hospital. The days of home births and midwives are not that common. In my case, for example, I think my first 3 siblings were born at home. They had the benefit of my great-grand aunt, Nurse Charles, who was a midwife for many, many years. But by the time my sister and I came around, we were born in a hospital, at Victoria Hospital. And I think it is pretty much fair to say that we all need hospitals, especially for those moments, and of course for even those who are dealing with complicated births and deliveries. That is, of course, expected. It is a place of birth, and of course, unfortunately, it is also a place to prolong life and unfortunately, in some instances, a place of death. And so, of course, hospitals are really full circle institutions that serve the entire population. It really represents a facility that we all have to end up going to at some point or another, whether it is to give support for individuals who have been admitted. And unfortunately, as we hear in our ads, in many instances, we're seeing the tendency of families to merely send those who are supposed to be loved and cared for at home. They have to go to hospital sometimes, and because of the challenges of care, depending on the individual's condition and age, we see hospitals becoming almost convalescence homes, almost senior homes to some degree. And of course, that has become a challenge in terms of bed capacity, in terms of being able to ensure that those who are going to hospitals for emergencies and who really do need beds sometimes can't get them because of that. And of course, this is not something that is peculiar to St. Lucia. Over at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Barbados, they've been battling this challenge of that issue for many, many years, even when, in the case of Barbados, they have geriatric hospitals tied to their polyclinics and their other facilities, but these have become places of refuge, especially in old age. And so the importance of St. Jude Hospital it cannot be underestimated. It is, of course, the facility that serves the southern half of the island, effectively that catchment from about Dennery to Soufrière. And of course, that's because it's a roughly half an hour driving time from those extremes to cantonment in Vieux Fort, that effectively serves as the catchment for that area. But of course, even prior to the fire, St. Jude was sometimes a hospital of choice for even persons in the north of the island who were seeking to do elective surgeries, who sometimes preferred the level of service that St. Jude Hospital had afforded. And partly because it had a somewhat of a different origin and history. It was rebirthed as a result of the work of a Catholic order of nuns, the Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother, out of the United States back in the 1960s, 1966. And it effectively always had a board of management involved, which was a lot more hands-on, I suppose, in terms of guidance and oversight of that institution. And because of that nature, it had to be more mindful of issues such as quality of service and ensuring that it was delivering a good product, because the expectation as well was that persons had to also pay for some of the services afforded at St. Jude Hospital. And so, of course, it still is currently managed by a board which has been established by Act of Parliament. And that was part of the thinking as well, in terms of, as well as the challenge, one can say as well, in terms of the whole rebuild of St. Jude Hospital. The stakeholders of St. Jude, the community, the people who were part of that board, were very keen to ensure that the hospital was not going to wait another 50 years before it got an injection of upgrades. And there were a number of upgrades that had been proposed over the years for St. Jude Hospital, which unfortunately never really materialized. And so since the 1960s, effectively, the footprint of that hospital did not really change. It was effectively still what had been left over by the Americans who were there as part of the World War II efforts, and of course constructed that military hospital up at Cantonment to serve Beanfield, which of course was the name of the base in the south of the island. And so the desire of the Board of Management to ensure that as much as possible could be put into that hospital did lead, one could say, to a level of scope creep in the St. Jude Hospital project. Originally, it was seen to be a sort of, when that fire came, the idea was a very quick fix. And it would have been just to pretty much go in and to rebuild the surgical building, which is where, in fact, the fire occurred. And the Taiwanese government had agreed effectively to do that, and also to fund a master plan for the hospital expansion and redevelopment, but not actually to fund the overall cost of that redevelopment, which would have involved the entire St. Jude Hospital complex. And so that was already a challenge, because once the teams who were looking at that project got involved in it, they realized that here you had a facility that needed far, far more work than simply just replacing the surgical building, which had been destroyed. It effectively meant that the entire roof of the facility had to be replaced. Very old roof, which was using asbestos material, that had to be replaced. The pipes also were asbestos based. and those had to be replaced. The electricals had to be redone. The entire facility effectively had to be gutted and rebuilt. And if in effect, that is exactly what ended up happening. And although the original intent of the Stevenson King administration was to do the quick fix on St. Jude, and you would have heard the preliminary figures of what it was going to cost was like, the first figure I think which was quoted was $2 million US, and we know of course that clearly could never have been the case today. And but that was the idea, a very quick fix. And when it was realized that, look, there's no way that could work, it was really an issue of like a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, and you really needed transplants, effectively, operations to bring the facility back to where it needed to be. There was that realization that, look, we are already in this. The idea of building a separate facility at the time being proposed somewhere in the vicinity of the existing George Odlum Stadium or Hospitium, where St. Jude currently is. The idea then was to forget about building that other hospital and to simply concentrate on bringing St. Jude up to an acceptable standard as a secondary care general hospital for the south of the island. And that was a decision which had been taken by the Stevenson King administration, of which Mr. Alan Chasney, of which Mr. Guy Joseph were very much part of the cabinet of ministers at that time when that decision was taken back in 2011, before the November 2011 general election. And of course, it then meant that the scope of the project meant that the budget clearly was inadequate. The funding was inadequate because, as opposed to the Owen King EU Hospital, a project which went through a very, very long life cycle itself. Remember, this was a project which had originally been agreed to back in 2002 after many, many studies, after almost 5 years of studies and feasibilities and looking at what was the best option to move forward with for the north of the island and for a new National General Hospital. That decision was eventually taken to create the Owen King EU Hospital. But there was a direct line of finance in that the European Union agreed to provide what effectively has been the largest grant ever provided by the European Union for the purpose of constructing what we now know as OKEU. That was not the case in the matter of St. Jude Hospital. So even though we saw spending, I think by the time the Stevenson King administration had left, nearly $30 million had already been spent on St. Jude Hospital. I think about $33 million or so on that facility, and much, much more had to be spent. And as I mentioned, there were a number of things that were not incorporated within the original St. Jude that were deemed to be critical for its long-term operations. So, for example, the need for a modern morgue was not part of that plan. The need for proper security and a security and ambulance facility was not part of that original plan. The idea of having private ward rooms was not part of the original plan for St. Jude Hospital. The idea of having a dedicated warehouse space, which was seen to be important by the hospital planners, given the context of where St. Jude was and the possibility, especially in the case of a hurricane, in the case of a major disaster. We know the situation with the Bardilil in the past, where the island has effectively been cut in half. The need for that hospital to be able to operate almost as a standalone and to be able to have the capacity to handle high volumes of supplies sufficient to run that hospital was determined. There was a proposal for the need for an isolation building as part of the overall build-out of St. Jude Hospital, given the proximity of the hospital to the international airport and the possibilities of dealing with things like COVID. And this was even before COVID, right? The thinking then was already to have this facility because you may need to have and of course, we had already had the knowledge of things like H1N1 and swine flu, avian flu outbreaks, Ebola. So, of course, the idea of quarantine was important, and that was also being looked at within the context of St. Jude Hospital. So there were a number of elements that were being brought forward by the stakeholders, which ended up expanding the scope of the project. However, within that context was the challenge of funding. And so the government did not have this line of finance to be able to say, hey, we can just pull out. It was really a matter, and we know it was a little donation here, a little donation there. At the end of the day, I think St. Lucians donated somewhere in the region of $4 million towards St. Jude. There were donations from the Australian government. There were donations from the German government. They came in to provide, I think, support for the water systems and the water tank, storage tanks for St. Jude. There were donations from the Mexican government during that same period of time to support the construction of the morgue and the ambulance security building. There were donations from the U.S. government as well in terms of some level of support for equipment. But at the Taiwanese government very generously donated, I think, in the vicinity of about 23 million EC dollars worth of funding to procure equipment and for construction as well. And so all of that, however, was still inadequate to be able to complete this 90-bed facility. And so, of course, it meant that the government then had to find the funding, and remember, this was at a time when the country was facing effectively a period of austerity because the country's finances had been in a very difficult situation. We were seeing what was effectively a fiscal deficit of 9%, 9% fiscal deficit around the year 2011, 2012. And so the funding had to be negotiated, and that eventually came through the approval of a loan of $20 million US dollars or 54 million EC dollars by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, Taiwan. And so what existed when there was a change of government in 2016, in June of 2016, was a project within which, across two administrations at that point, King and Anthony, spent up to $98 million on St. Jude Hospital. It was a project that had raised financing, a total of $142 million worth of financing had been secured. So $98 million had been spent, and a lot of that money, which had already been spent on St. Jude Hospital, was for the procurement of equipment and materials which had been in storage or pending delivery, right? So, for example, things like GE, General Electric, they were supplying a lot of the diagnostic equipment to fit out the CT scanners and the dialysis, hemodialysis unit, and a lot of other areas, the X-ray machines. All of that had been already on order, not yet delivered, because you've got to wait until the point where the space is ready for delivery. And that was there, materials, equipment for the laundry and the kitchen already procured and on island. Equipment like the flooring for the vinyl flooring that was required, very specialized flooring, and for the walls as well, that had to go up. That was on island, had already been acquired. electrical supplies on island had already been acquired. So a lot of the equipment, a lot of the money of that $98 million was actually in supplies and equipment to be fitted out for that hospital. And so what we then saw in 2016 was a stoppage of the project for 3.5 years. And a lot of that equipment, we don't even know what ended up happening with the equipment, because it appears that equipment might very well have been sold, might very well have paints were taken away from the suppliers who were authorized to handle it. And of course, the other issue too with a lot of the supplies is that you end up in a situation where if it's not going to be utilized properly, if it's not going to be stored properly, if it's not going to be secured properly, you end up with a situation where it may very well have to be disposed. And that is unfortunately what happened to a lot of the equipment and materials that were supplied and procured for St. Jude Hospital. Because you had a project that could have been completed within that 6-month period, which was already mobilized, project going on, and then you have an order for work stoppage. You had then at that point, of course, a situation where you effectively were throwing away resources. And the decision at that point was to say, let's pour more concrete. Let's put more concrete and steel in the ground, which had already been done. That had already been done. There was enough space. There was enough floor area. There was enough usable space in St. Jude already built to be able to accommodate the operations of that hospital. And so that idea of taking another $130 million, which effectively is the cost we are being told for the box, the south wing, which was built, was completely unnecessary. And this is the challenge that we have with respect to that project. Because in addition to spending $130 million, which is now excess space for that facility, in for the large part excess space and unprogrammed space, you now have a situation where you've lost a lot of what was actually already brought in for materials and equipment. You've lost that, and you now have to go and restart that project. And this is effectively what has been the situation of St. Jude for the past 4 years. Thankfully, the government was able to raise through the Saudi assistance of the Saudi government, Saudi fund, development fund, $75 million to be able to complete St. Jude, and that by that meaning to complete the structure as well as to completely fit out the structure, equipment, the medical equipment, or everything that is required to ensure that the hospital can fully function and be commissioned, as well as some money is still to be spent on the refurbishment of the George Odlum Stadium once that move can be made back into the St. Jude Hospital. So it's a little strange that we're still, at this point, I suppose, hearing from people who claimed that they were saying, well, if we can't complete St. Jude within their 5 years, we shouldn't be hearing from them. But guess what? This is politics, and we're still hearing from those very, very same individuals. The cry now is, we've spent so much money on St. Jude. Really? Really? Of course we spend so much money on St. Jude. But we need not have, in fact, spent that $130 million. We need not have been looking at a situation of replacing what had already been acquired and was in storage and was not utilized and goodness knows what happened for a lot of the materials and had to now be reacquired. A lot of waste certainly has occurred with respect to St. Jude Hospital. Buildings being demolished, another good case in point with respect to St. Jude Hospital. So it is a very unfortunate situation that the country has had to face since 2009. And let us really, really hope, all politics aside, that we can see the completion of this hospital. And of course, from the images that we're seeing, we're finally getting to this point where that facility can be opened and can operate. And I would also want to point out that it's one thing to get to the point of commissioning, but of course the importance of maintenance within the context of any building, any facility is so vital. We're already seeing the pressures on that of OKEU. We already saw some very sad horror stories with respect to equipment as well with OKEU. Equipment that was procured, diagnostic equipment procured, that because of poor maintenance or actions not being taken to ensure that the facility was being properly maintained, a lot of equipment lost there as well. And so we certainly need to be able to see this as a significant watershed moment in terms of changing the situation with respect to healthcare in St. Lucia. That is our dish of the day. And when we come back, we will, of course, take in our weather report and then head to the phone lines.
This has been The Daily Dish.
Every bed in our hospitals tells a story of someone's mother, someone's brother, someone's friend. And when that story of care is complete, it's time for the next chapter, home. But too often, discharged patients are left waiting hours, days, weeks, sometimes months, not because they want to stay, but because no one comes. We understand life gets busy, but every extra day they wait means another patient, perhaps in pain, perhaps in crisis, can't get the bed they desperately need. So when the call comes that your loved one is ready, please be ready too. Pick them up, bring them back to the comfort of family, where healing truly continues. Because caring doesn't end at discharge, it continues with you. A message from the Ministry of Health, Wellness and Elderly Affairs.
It's now time for your weather report, brought to you by Island Style.
Girl, I've been so stressed searching for the perfect tiles to complete my home.
Really?
Yeah, it's always the same white, beige, and gray tiles with these tile stores. Like they're all buying from the same place. You're the design expert. Help me, please. I'm fed up.
What are you looking for?
Something different. Something that says Caribbean beauty and suits my personality. Something vibrant and classy with a little razzle dazzle.
Okay, Ms. Razzle Dazzle, I know just the place. Island Style Tile and Bath, they're my #1 store for everything tile. And with their new In Living Color collection, you'll find the most gorgeous tiles to give you that splash of Caribbean flair you're looking for.
That sounds perfect.
I'll even take you myself and throw in a free design consultation.
I'll never say no to that, sis. I can't afford you anyway.
Visit our Island Style showrooms in Castries, Rodney Bay, and View Fort, or call 450-452 or 453 Tile. We'll help bring your vision to life in living color.
This is Radio Caribbean International. It's now time for the weather news.
And the forecast for St. Lucia valid for the next 24 hours. Winds will be blowing from between the east and east-northeast near 16 miles per hour or 26 kilometers per hour. Weather generally fair and warm this afternoon. Partly cloudy, becoming cloudy at times with a few brief scattered showers and a slight chance of isolated thunderstorms from tonight into tomorrow. Forecast for the Lesser Antilles. Partly cloudy to cloudy at times, with light scattered showers to moderate showers and a chance of isolated thunderstorms. A weak tropical wave is expected to cause occasional cloudiness, showers, and possible thunderstorms over the Lesser Antilles during the forecast period. A tropical wave located over the eastern tropical Atlantic is moving westward near 12 miles per hour or 19 kilometers per hour. Tropical cyclone formation is not expected over the tropical Atlantic during the next 7 days. And that is your weather report, brought to you by Island Style.
This has been RCI's Weather News. For more information, call the Weather Hotline at 454-3452. RCI 101 number 1.
Girl, I've been so stressed searching for the perfect tiles to complete my home.
Really?
Yeah, it's always the same white, beige, and gray tiles with these tile stores. Like they're all buying from the same place. You're the design expert. Help me, please. I'm fed up.
What are you looking for?
Something different. Something that says Caribbean beauty and suits my personality. Something vibrant and classy with a little razzle dazzle.
Okay, Ms. Razzle Dazzle, I know just the place. Island Style Tile and Bath, they're my number 1 store for everything tile. And with their new In Living Color collection, you'll find the most gorgeous styles to give you that splash of Caribbean flair you're looking for.
That sounds perfect.
I'll even take you myself and throw in a free design consultation.
I'll never say no to that, sis. I can't afford you anyway.
Visit our Island Style showrooms in Castries, Rodney Bay, and View Fort, or call 450-452 or 453 Tile. We'll help bring your vision to life in living color.
And welcome back to the lunchroom here at Radio Caribbean International. Of course, the number to call in to tell us what's on your plate today, it is 452-3046. Again, 452-3046. And our WhatsApp number, it is 724-0008. Again, 724-0008. One of the things I don't think we have even quite established either way is the matter of how much the quote-unquote south wing would have eventually come up to in terms of a final cost. Originally, you would recall that we were told by Mr. Guy Joseph that he could, in fact, with the balance, with $80 million, I think it was 20 million US, no, 30 million US, sorry, I think was the budget that they were working with at the time, or roughly $81 million. And according to Mr. Joseph, at that time, based on what his experts were saying, it would cost another $100 million to complete what is now being completed. This is what was put forward by Mr. Joseph, and that he believed that he could do it for less. That was what we were told, and we could build a brand new hospital for less. We are now effectively finding out that of course did not happen. That the new structure, which is still right there on the south side of St. Jude Hospital, cost in the vicinity of $130 million. That structure is effectively currently a shell, and it's the superstructure. The superstructure is in place, and it has cladding, so the walls are in place. But in terms of a lot of the actual completed works on the inside, the finishing works on the inside, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, the fire hydrant system, the medical gas system, none of that is in. The walls, not in. The flooring, the internal walls I'm speaking of, not in. The flooring and finishing, not in. The lighting systems, not in. And that's just the physical structure. We're not even speaking about the cost then of the fitting out of that hospital in terms of equipment, right? That is not factored in as yet. So the idea that, and this is what we're being told, we should be astounded by the amount of money spent on St. Jude Hospital. But yet still, we are also not being told, but what would have been the final cost, the final price, had we gone ahead with the box, the southern wing, as it is sometimes termed. So it is, I think, a very unfair comparison to be made, but it's quite often what we've seen in terms of the narrative coming out of the leader of the opposition. He throws a very outrageous number, and he says, look, we should be appalled about this. And so this is what we're hearing. $400 million, my goodness, is what was being spent on St. Jude Hospital. And in like manner, when he said, 800 deportees, we should be appalled. As to the reality of it, it's a completely different situation. As to how much of that $400 million could have been saved had his administration simply completed St. Jude Hospital, we are clearly, we could perhaps try to work it out, but it would certainly, I suspect, be upwards of, because certainly $130 million should not have been spent on that southern wing, and we need not have spent probably close to a third of what is being spent now, because the cost of actually now having to go and fit out and buy the same things over and over again, that's really should not have been spent. So definitely the country has seen wastage with respect to St. Jude Hospital. But the question is, what caused that wastage that we have to deal with? And I do hope that we need to get an answer with respect to this matter. The idea of commissions of inquiry, some people say they don't like to see that. And this is, of course, we've heard about the need for the special prosecutor, and as to whether that is a matter that the special prosecutor is looking into, I would like to hope so, because then certainly is a need for, once things have been completed with this hospital, it is very important from a perspective of learning, of lessons, of things not to repeat, that we need to have that analysis with respect to what happened with the St. Jude Hospital. A lot of equipment, a lot of materials. And we saw the bravado of the then Minister of Economic Development moving along with police officers heading from commercial establishment to commercial establishment in the name of the state to, quote unquote, recover materials and equipment. And we are then, when asked about that matter, we were told, there is some accounting of it, but as to what happened to it, we are still, in many instances, none the wiser. And I think it is very important from that perspective that is, in fact, answered for the benefit of the country moving forward. Quite often, we do not learn from those types of mistakes and sometimes don't take the necessary actions otherwise. Because remember, in respect of OKEU, in respect of St. Jude Hospital, it would appear that the approach would have been to say, hey, can we potentially privatize this? And we've been hearing about that. We've been hearing about that in terms of national health insurance. Can we privatize this? Can we do these things? And I think this is one of the challenges that countries have to have, and one of the conversations that countries have to have. What should be privatized? What should have private sector involvement? And what is the extent of private sector involvement that should exist in what services being provided by the state? Because we know that the whole idea of government, the whole idea of having a state, is that certain services need to be universal and must be provided for all, for the benefit of all. So items and things like education, like healthcare, one would expect certainly that these things are to the benefit of all and should therefore be able to afford because the average everyday St. Lucian is depending on these social goods for their use. So you can't, in principle, look at privatizing education in the main. You should not be thinking, in my view, of privatizing healthcare in the main. You should not be thinking about, say, privatizing the justice system in the main, the police force. These are things that are anathema, I would think, in modern societies and in terms of how we see it. But let's also know that there are people who have the view that some of these things should be privatized. You have the view that, for example, Mr. Donald Trump seems to have the view that education in the United States, there should be no involvement by the federal government in it, and they should abolish the Department of Education. In the United States, healthcare is a very privately driven commodity at this point in time, to the extent, of course, that it is the country that spends the most on healthcare. Not when I say the country, I'm talking about people, the whole country itself, not the government, but the people spend the most on healthcare. And so, is that what we want to be able to see with respect to our country? Where do you see private sector involvement? Where can you see the role of the private sector in providing certain services? Now, of course, there has to be a balance, and we know that you can have private sector involvement. We here right in St. Lucia, of course, we have private facilities, private doctors. They have their own clinics. We know there's a private hospital that runs in St. Lucia. But in the main, there has to be this safeguard and this safety net for which all individuals can, in fact, benefit. And so that, of course, is a really important philosophical disposition that the state should have, and a conversation regarding where people stand on these matters. Because we have seen, of course, how other things somehow, which could in theory be privatized, we saw pushback on privatization of that. And we can speak to the Hiwanor International Airport. For a very long time, airports, ports are some of those items that have been identified as areas that you can actually have private investment in. And we're seeing that happening all around the world. In the United Kingdom, for example, the second busiest airport already, London Gatwick, is being run under concession by Vinci. The Heathrow, similar sort of situation occurring there. In many countries in Latin America, that exists. In Jamaica, both international airports, Sangster and Norman Manley, have private involvement through PPPs. And so that model is a model that is, in fact, very much encouraged, because you have these sectors which have very clear lines of revenue. You have the dependence on a high level of foreign inputs coming from outside. So, for example, in the case of the airport, it is largely at the moment being utilized by international travelers, persons coming in, visitors to the island. So you've got a revenue stream that is coming from the outside into the country. And so there can be an argument made that you can, in fact, run these facilities through private involvement, not to say that the facility is simply sold away for perpetuity, but that you can utilize private involvement for the benefit of making the investment and for the suitable running of those facilities. And that was what we saw going on with respect to the Hiwanor International Airport, where there was a public-private partnership which was designed and built out in collaboration with the International Finance Corporation, an arm of the World Bank, giving guidance to say this is how we can, in fact, approach the redevelopment of the Hiwanora International Airport. And we saw that stopped completely for a model that involved effectively taking on debt financing for Hiwanora International Airport. And this is what we are being told should not happen as well with respect to Global Port Holdings. Again, another situation where there is this idea being put out there that the ports have been sold. Whereas the reality is we're dealing with, and in fact, just very recently at a function I was at, somebody was commenting about something with the cargo at the port, and you say, oh, but it's GPH. And I pointed out, but that the cargo operations of the port are actually not GPH. GPH has nothing to do with the cargo that is going on in the port. GPH is actually coming in to look at the cruise operations with respect to the port of Castries and Soufrière. That is what is actually going on there. And the reality is the most lucrative part of the port operations, where Slasway in fact makes the most revenue, is in fact on the cargo side, not on the side of the side of cruise. It is, of course, a nice belief that we can somehow do everything on our own, but the reality is countries do have limits in terms of how much they can in fact borrow. And so that's where you have to look at, especially where you have highly capital intensive areas where you can in fact bring in private sector investment, foreign direct investment, then you should look to be able to potentially allow for that to happen. But do you necessarily want for those things to now run things like your hospital, where people's lives are at matter, where a situation where what happens when somebody ends up going to that facility? Are they going to be guaranteed the right to be able to be seen, especially in the case of an emergency? Those are some of the things that we certainly have to safeguard against and look forward into the future with respect to this whole issue of public-private investment and who is, in fact, taking that on. And so it's a conversation we will continue perhaps tomorrow, because we're almost out of time here on the program. Tomorrow's program, I also want to touch on the matter of universal education. And of course, we heard from the United Workers' Party leader, one of his SOS promises, that of the free tuition access for Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. And of course, the big question there, how sincere is that, given his earlier pronouncements regarding Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, even at a time when he was trying to argue that they weren't paying rent and they are almost a burden on the state by the country spending $15 million, and almost suggesting that was too much money to be spending on Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. So we'll walk back and have a look at that matter, because I think we all want to see, certainly, better access for education at all levels, from early childhood right up to university level. That is certainly a goal I think a country like St. Lucia should have, to be able to achieve that. This is what countries that have the means, a lot of social democratic countries in Scandinavia and in Europe, afford free education from birth right up through to adulthood. Free education is on offer. And we certainly want to look at this entire matter of education, because at one point in time, we should also say, there was a belief during the colonial period that education should have been a private venture, right? And that's when you saw institutions like that of St. Mary's College and St. Joseph's Convent, at one time the only secondary schools around, those were not owned by the state. They still aren't really owned by the state, and the role of the state was seen not to be necessary within the space of education, within the context of the colonial period. But of course, we're also told by some that colonialization had a conscience. So we'll have that conversation tomorrow on education, universal education, and we do hope that you can join us for that on the Lunchroom. I'm your host, Calix George Jr., saying goodbye.